Hey everyone, Dan Johnston here. I'm the Jack of all Ministries here to help you make it happen. And today I'm going to show you how I took my old Orange County drum set and made it into something that I like better. So before I get into the actual, hands-on what I did to change these drums, I want to start off by giving you just a little bit of background as to why I did this in the first place. So I've been playing the drums a lot more at church lately, and the drum set at church is an electronic kit. And if you've ever played electric drums before, they're smaller drums and they're more compact, and everything's just tighter. So when I would come home, I started noticing that I was just getting very uncomfortable. I just started, I don't know, a few months ago, the Stool Pigeon Drums channel where I do, drum covers and stuff like that. So if you want to check out that, little cardie up here if you want to go look at my other channel. And you can actually see these drums in action then. And so I decided I wanted to make some changes, and my first thought was, okay, let me just change everything out. I'll sell these drums and I'll buy some new ones with some different sizes. But that wasn't working because I couldn't sell my Orange County kit because now I guess Orange County sold their brand to Guitar Center, and Guitar Center doesn't build them the same way that Orange County used to. So I couldn't get what I wanted for the drums, and it was like, okay, well, what am I going to do then? And I thought, well, I know how to work on stuff, so how about I edit these? So I decided that I was going to make two changes. I wanted to make a playability change. So, so basically I wanted to shorten my toms because I really like the sound of short toms. Plus, they're much more easier to position where you want them to be, so you can bring them in tighter and you can bring them over the bass drum more to bring your floor toms and your rack toms closer. So that's good. And the other thing is I wanted to change the look. I got these drums back when I lived in California, so I've probably had them for about 10 years. And, they had a, kind of a charcoal matte wrap on them, which I always liked. But on stage, they were left next to a hot analog light, and the wrap on my two floor toms actually melted. And so that's bugged me for years, and now I finally get a chance to change it into something that I like a little bit better. So now let's go ahead and hop over to the process. We'll take a look at what I did here, show you how I edited these drums, kind of a step-by-step sort of thing. So the first thing I did was I disassembled the drums. Of course, you take off the hoops and the heads, and the bass drum claws and hoops and all that stuff. And I highly recommend, if you're ever doing this where you're taking all the heads off of your drums all at one time, get yourself a drill bit and use a drill to get it all taken apart because drum keys just take forever. I have a little bit from Gibraltar. I think I paid a couple of bucks for it, but I mean, honestly, I've had this thing for years. And it just makes life so much easier just to unscrew things. So then I started taking the rest of the drums apart. I started with the lugs, took all the lugs apart, and I put the screws back into the lugs so I wouldn't lose them or the washers or anything. And put them all in a bag with their tension rods, and each bag was labeled individually because you don't want to lose these, and it's better if you can just keep them all organized. And honestly, lugs are different. Bass drum lugs are different from rack tom lugs. Sometimes snare lugs are different too. Like it might be a double-ended lug or something. So it's important just to kind of keep things different. Plus tension rod sizes are often different. So just keep your life easy. Put them all in their own bag, isolated. I also took off all the specialty stuff too. So the spurs from the kick drum, and the tom leg mounts that are on the floor toms, the rack mounts and stuff like that. I also took off the grommets and all of the badges too. And the badges I really wanted to be careful with because they were just thin aluminum, with very sharp corners that could easily bend. So kept everything isolated, set aside. That way I was sure that I wasn't going to lose anything. And the great thing is, now that everything was out of my studio, my wife could come in here and vacuum everything for me, which I was so grateful for. And I know that it had been driving her crazy because with drums in here, you can't really vacuum all the wood chips from the sticks and the dust and all that stuff. So she was grateful, I'm grateful, and that all worked out to everybody's benefit. Now, because everything was disassembled, I could put all of my shells into one drum bag that would make it easy to transport everything over to my buddy Pat's shop. He is a master woodworker. He knows what he's doing, and his shop has everything you could ever possibly need. Now, even though I'm showing you things in a professional, high-production type shop, the truth is all the tools that we used, except for one that I can think of, really weren't specialty tools. It was all pretty generic woodworking stuff. I think we used a table saw, a router table, routers, all stuff that, basically anybody with like a any sort of decent woodworking ability would have access to. And honestly, there are probably substitutes you can make for everything that we did too. So anyway, once I got into Pat's shop, the first thing I did was I took all my old wraps off. And, an old wrap is typically going to be, double-sided taped or even glued on just in one strip. And that's what these were. And so I took those off, and then I went ahead and sanded down kind of where the glue spots were. And when I did that, I didn't use an electric sander, pneumatic sander, or anything like that. I wanted to just do it by hand, because when you're using something that has power, like machine power, if it's sanding, it tends to leave a flat spot. So I did it by hand to make sure that it kept the smoothness. Another thing to think about, if you're going to be changing the exterior look of your drums, the finish ply underneath my wrap was pretty nasty. There's like a lot of, like, you could see wood filler and spots where, like, parts of the plies were just kind of put together, and there's even like gaps in between them a little bit and stuff like that. Because when drums are made, the outside ply isn't your finish ply, and so they just use what you got. So if you're thinking you're going to go take a wrap off of a drum set and still have good wood underneath that you'll be able to stain or something, that's probably not the case. And that wasn't the case for me either, so that's why I ended up putting a veneer on the outside for a different type of wood. So like I said, I wanted to cut down my 2 rack toms so that they were short enough to maneuver around the kit. Now when I did that, I cut my 10-inch tom down to a 5.5-inch depth, and then I took my 12-inch tom and cut that down to a 6-inch depth, which is, pretty low profile. And now when you do that, you want to make sure that you consider everything that you're going to lose by smashing the tom down. Now for me, it ended up working out great because my lugs have what's called a 7/8 offset, which means that your lugs are not straight in line with each other vertically. They're slightly offset. And so that means that you can actually squeeze them together, and actually my lugs overlap each other, which I can do because they're offset. You also have to consider where the holes are, so you don't want to actually cut your drum through a hole and have weird, hills that you got to deal with or whatever, or low spots or whatever you would call half a hole. I guess half a hole. So you want to be careful, right? And then also you're going to want to make sure you can move your badge around. You'll have spots for grommets, and things are going to still have to work when you shorten toms. So make sure you think about that if you're considering shortening up your toms. So in order to cut these down, basically we just went to the table saw, we set up the fence, and what I did was I didn't want to just like spin the shell into the blade or anything like that. What I decided to do was press it up against the fence nice and tight and make sure there was no movement. And I pushed it forward and then took it back and then rotated it and then pushed it through again without rotating as it went through the blade. And I did that to make sure that I was really focusing on keeping it tight against the fence, so there wasn't an opportunity for slippage to come while it's rotating and leave you with like a crooked cut. So I went through and did both of my rack toms that way, and even though I did it and everything seemed really great, I still wanted to just sand it down just to make sure everything was level. And so what I did was I got 4 sanding discs that have adhesive on them and laid that down and then just spun the shell against it to sand it so that I made sure everything was flat and smooth on the areas where I had cut down the toms. So at this point, Pat let me go look through his veneer supply to see what he had just kind of lying around. Now fortunately, he had 2 sheets of Sapele, which is also called African mahogany, but I guess that's kind of a misnomer because even though Sapele is part of the mahogany family, it's not actually true mahogany. But anyway, Sapele is what I decided to do, and I really like it. It's kind of like a cool vertical grain cut that way when you're done with it, you get like really cool stripes out of it. And when I saw that and he was like, yeah, man, you can have that, I was like, yes, this is awesome. So I was really pumped to figure out that I was going to have some Sapele drums at the end of this. So once we got the veneers out, we went ahead and cut those up, and we used the exact same sizes that we had already had from the wraps that I had on there before, at least vertically, from bearing edge to bearing edge. That way, once I had them cut, we could just set it on the drum and we wouldn't have to trim that down or anything. And that ended up being exactly a perfect size. But when it came to the length of it, we left it just a little bit long because we wanted to be able to come back and trim up for a perfect seam later. And so Pat took it over to this really weird saw. I don't even know what this is called. I almost want to call it like a panel saw, but it's not really. It's some kind of a weird table saw. So anyway, we cut those up. And by the way, if you don't have wraps that you can compare your sizes to, all you need to do is just, the vertical measurement from bearing edge to bearing edge is easy. You just use a tape measure for that. But for the other way, the best thing to do is just to get like a measuring tape, like a flexible one, like one that like a tailor would use, and just wrap that around the drum. So much easier than trying to use a tape measure or like do math or something like that. So something to keep in mind. So when it came time to attach the veneers, what we did was we used a combination square to find where the perfectly straight vertical line would be to make things square. And we marked that off using some painter's tape. And that way what we did is we brought the veneer, we lined it up with the tape line, and then we used just a block, we turned it on its side, and we clamped that to hold the veneer down. Okay, so that's how we were going to get that started. Now, because Pat has a production shop, he has a barrel of contact cement ready at all times with an air compressor hooked up to it, and he just sprays it on. What you'd probably be doing, assuming you don't have that, is you could just buy contact cement and just use like a regular paint roller, roll it on the surface, and then let it sit for a little bit. The can will tell you how long. It's a few minutes, 20 minutes, something like that. And once it's ready, then you can go ahead and just roll it on with a J roller. And so that's what we did after we sprayed this on. We got the wrap and started bringing it around the shell, which was perfectly laid out. And once we got all the way around, we just used the J roller as we went to flatten it out. And then as the seam was coming together, we left a little bit of overlap, and we moved the block over to hold it down to make sure it wasn't going to go anywhere. We clamped that down to make sure that we knew everything was going to be nice and tight. And when we got all of those drums lying over there in the shop at the end of the night, and I looked over and I saw them all getting ready to go, I was really excited to know that, my drums were already looking really good, even though they were just kind of a dusty brown. Now, once the contact cement had dried and I came back, he actually used something to make a seam called, what is it called? An underscribe router. It's like a seaming router. I'd never seen one of these before, but it's really cool. This would be the specialty tool that you probably don't have. If you want to buy one, I saw them online for about $180 to get like a Porter cable one. Or you can get just the base itself for I saw like $110, something like that. And basically what this thing does is there's a router bit, and the base guides the two sheets together, and then the bit runs down the middle, and it makes them the perfect length, so when you press them down, the seam butts up exactly perfect. It was really a cool thing. It's like, man, I got to get one of these, but I don't have to because I have friends that have them. So anyway, we used this and we seamed up everything. So once we had the seams cut, then we moved the blocks back onto the drums, and we put the block across the seam to hold it down so that it would dry overnight. So once I came back the next day, I was really happy with the way that everything was looking. We took all the blocks off, and we used a router with a flush trim bit to go around the edges, also the bass drum hoops. And then with the bass drum hoop, I also used the adhesive sandpaper that I had put down to make sure that came out nice and smooth as well, and then just kind of also went around the corner so there wasn't a sharp edge from the veneer. And then it was time to head over to the router table. Now, the veneers had already been cut almost perfectly on all of the drums except for the two rack toms that were cut down. And so I ran that through the router table, just barely took off anything just to make sure that the veneer and the wood from the bearing edge just lined up perfectly. Really, it didn't take hardly any cutting at all. But for the two rack toms, that was basically cutting a brand new bearing edge there. And so I cut the inside first to the depth that I wanted it, and then I went through and did the outside. And I don't have any videos of that because I was very frustrated because the veneer kept chipping. And I couldn't figure out why it kept chipping. And then I went and talked to Pat, and Pat came over and he said, "Pastor, can I tell you something?" Now, when Pat says, "Pastor, can I tell you something?" that means I'm doing something really wrong. And so I was like, "Yeah, what's going on?" And he said, "Man, you need to calm down and slow down." Basically, I was just rushing so much that, I wasn't taking my time at the router table. And so I slowed down and I allowed it to do the cutting, and there was no more chipping. Basically, all I had to do was slow down. Now, when I'm cutting a bearing edge, I like using just a 45 degree, a chamfer bit. And I like to take the point of the bearing edge, cutting the inside and the outside. I'd like to take the point about 2/3 towards the outside. Now, I've seen drums where it's right down the middle. I've seen drums where they bring it up to the outside edge. I've seen drums where they do a round over. You can do whatever you want here. Honestly, I don't think the bearing edge makes that much of a difference in terms of resonance and stuff like that. Of course, it does make a difference, but I think drummers have a tendency to make a way bigger deal about that than actually makes sense. And I just, for me, that's just what I do. You do what you want to do, but that's my thing. So then the next step was to come in and sand down the veneers and make everything start to look nice and smooth. So basically, again, I did this by hand. I used, I think, like 150 grit, maybe something like that, mostly just to knock off any glue residue or, any something that just didn't look right on the finish, like dirt or something like that. I also kind of went around the bearing edge just to make sure everything was, kind of blended together and nice. and I was really happy with it. And then I used a stain that Pat gave me because he says that anytime you use something like Sapele where you really want the grain to kind of contrast and get the stripes to really stand out, he recommended this it was kind of a brownish, like a light walnut kind of a color. And I just put that on there really lightly, and it didn't change the look of the wood that much, but it did make the colors really seem to contrast more, even more than putting a finish on it would. Because, if you put water on it, you can kind of see what the finish will look like. And it really just made it pop. And so I was really happy with the way that the stain did that. And so once I went through and stained everything, I left it at the shop so that Pat could have his finish guy, do a finish coat for me. Now, if you're going to finish it, of course, you could just use a rattle can, or you could spray something from a gun or something like that. That's what Pat's guy did. He sprays it using a regular finish gun. And Pat asked me what kind of finish I wanted, and I was kind of torn. Like, I like the way that flat looks, but at the same time, I like there to be a little gloss, plus it's like cleaner. And he said, well, what about a semi-gloss? Because that's the way he usually finishes his stuff. And I was like, let's go for it. He says it looks good. And when it came back, I was really, really happy with it. And I really like it mostly because I feel like a lot of glossy finishes, really, it's like you're looking at a finish through a window, but this really just makes it feel like the finish itself is shining. And so I'm really happy with the way that the semi-gloss finish, came out. So then I was able to take the shells back to my house, and that's where I finished up the rest of the assembly there. And so basically I had to drill out all the holes again because the veneer didn't have any holes in it. And the way that I decided to do it, I went from the inside of the shell using a small, like a 3/32 bit or something like that, and just poked a hole down the center so I knew where the holes were going to be. And then I came from the outside and used the right side hole to make sure that any chip out that I had was going to go on the inside of the shell. I really didn't have much, but I still wanted to make sure I took the extra step. However, we can't forget about the 2 rack toms that I had where I had to make a completely new set of holes, and I had to fill in some of the old ones. So I got 3 different dowels, a 3/8, a 1/4 inch, and a 1/16 of an inch, I believe, to fill in the holes for the old things, because the badge screws are the 1/16 of an inch. The 1/4 inch went for the top lug holes that were still remaining, and then the 3/8 inch was for the old grommet holes that I had to fill. And basically I just cut those grommets down to the thickness of the shell and glued it inside. Once the glue dried, I put some wood filler in there and just sanded it down so that you really don't see much if you're looking inside a clear head or something like that. But then I had to drill the new holes. The way I did it was I got my combination square and I lined it up with the existing lug holes, and then on the other side I offset it by using the combination square's width, which I think is like an inch and an eighth, something like that, to pop it over, and then I marked the vertical line there. So everything was exactly the same offset from the existing lug holes, so I knew the pattern was right and the offset was uniform. So I came in and with my drill I did a small pilot hole and then drilled through it to the full size, and then basically all my holes were drilled. So then I had one more thing to do before I started assembling. I took my bass drum hoops and I taped off where the new veneer was, but I wanted to recoat the inside of it with black spray paint because they were already black, but there were a lot of like just kind of scratches on it, and like of course where like the bass drum pedal mounts to the hoop, there's all kinds of wear and stuff there. So I went ahead and just gave it a coat of some black gloss spray paint. Just to have it finished there, peeled off the tape, looked great, and I was ready to start assembling. So I started with the lugs first, obviously, put those in there, got everything out of the bags, everything was still there, everything was still in order, and everything was, started coming together great. All the lugs went in, then I put, the spurs on, the tom holders, all that kind of stuff. And then I didn't want to get new drum heads. Number one, because I didn't want to wait. Number two, because I'm too cheap to buy more drum heads. And I went ahead and just put the drum heads on there and tuned them up, and I was ready to bring them inside. And the day that I brought them in, I was really excited. I was also changing out my cymbals at the same time, which is a whole nother video. So my splash cymbal hadn't come in yet. But I didn't want to wait. So I brought in my kick drum, brought in the snare, and I was so pumped, and everything was beautiful. And how about I just let you see it for yourself? So in the end, I was really happy with how everything turned out. I love that the kit is both kind of classy and it's like exciting and unique at the same time. Like, I feel like this is the type of kit that I could go take to some, like, you know, black tie, you know, jazz ensemble thing and fit in just nicely, or I could take it to a punk concert and fit in nicely there as well. It's, you know, kind of a mix of class and style, I think. And so I'm really happy with it. I like the way that the vertical stripes just kind of really jump out at you. I've gotten a lot of compliments from people that have seen it. And again, if you haven't, you know, if you really want to have a good chance to see what it's like, you can go to my Stool Pigeon Drums channel, check out one of my covers or something, and you can see kind of how they look and how they sound and how they play and stuff like that. They're really comfortable. The tom placement is perfect for me. I don't think I'll ever go back to having a single high tom again. I think I'm always going to have two. And yeah, so anyway, I'm really happy with it. Well, thanks guys for watching this video. Hopefully you found it helpful, and if you did, I'd appreciate it if you would consider liking this video and subscribing to this channel, because, well, this is the type of stuff that I like to do. And if it wasn't helpful, hopefully it was at least somewhat interesting or entertaining, and if it wasn't, well, go try Stool Pigeon Drums. Hopefully that will be. And if that's not, then I don't know what to tell you. But anyway, thanks again for watching. I hope you have a great day, and I'll see you on the next video.